Our next storyteller, a 12-year-old actress, struggles for acceptance in an adult world. You may have actually heard of her before. Please welcome Parker Sela with her story, Hansel.
In 7th grade, my English teacher called me up to her desk before class and asked me the question no 12-year-old student ever wants to hear. Parker, you're short, right? Now, I was not the brightest student in her class, but I was pretty sure I was gonna get an A on this pop quiz. Yes, I am. At 4'11", I was the shortest in the class. She went on to tell me about a theater company she was part of and how they were putting on a production and they needed, one of the parts was for a 6-year-old blonde German boy. She had told the director that no, you don't actually want a 6-year-old blonde German boy, you want someone who looks like a 6-year-old blonde German boy. And so I had come to mind. Draw your own conclusions. I told her I was interested and she warned me that the show was a little bit raunchy. I assured her it was fine, and that night the script arrived in my parents' email inbox. Hedwig and the Angry Inch was the raunchiest show I had ever been exposed to. I read my section first, and when I said I liked it, my parents let me read the whole thing. When I say that to this day, it is probably the most sexual thing I have ever experienced, understand that I'm a college student at a liberal arts school. So I could walk by more sex, drugs, and rock and roll in a normal afternoon than most people see in a year. I was excited and interested by the show, even if I was a little bit overwhelmed. And I told my parents that, and they set me up with an audition and got the ball rolling from there. I remember walking into the audition room maybe more nervous than I'd ever been up until that point. This was the most important and professional and adult thing that I'd ever done. We'd gotten my hair done up all short, so I looked like a boy, and it was tight, and I had a headache, and I was nervous, and I was running my lines in my head, and the audition went great. The director offered me the part on the spot, which in the moment took to mean that I was the greatest actress ever to grace the world, and in retrospect meant that I was the only person who auditioned. Which is definitely true. I was the only kid he knows. I'm pretty sure I'm still the only kid he knows. Walking into the first day of rehearsals, I was once again more nervous than I had ever been up until that point. The first rehearsal took place in the basement of an apartment building in the Tenderloin. I remember walking in the room with my parents in tow, and the room was dark, and it was hot, and it was loud, and it smelled like alcohol, and everyone there was clearly already friends, and most of them twice my age at least, so 24, 25, some of them almost 30. And I was pretty sure that none of them wanted a kid there. I was almost positive, in fact, especially when I overheard one actress saying that she really didn't like working with kids. This was definitely not a child-friendly place by any means. It was barely up to fire code, much less having any sort of child wrangler. I remember walking in one day and this one lady was swearing a blue streak about some a-hole who cut her off while she was parking and F this and screw that. And I hung on to my parents for most of the first couple of weeks very tightly. But I slowly found my way into the good graces of the cast, or at least I tried to. The director pulled me aside one day and said, since he couldn't pay me, since I was basically just a fancy volunteer, because to pay a child you'd need to have, they'd have to be within hours and you'd have to have all these sort of special requirements. There was no Olsen twin to switch me out with after I was, more than 6 hours or however much. He said that he would pay me in jelly beans. I told him I liked the peach ones best. I worked very hard to be seen as professional. I'm generally a pretty loud and exuberant person, and I tried to pull that back a little bit. I did not want to be seen as the bratty kid. That was the last thing that I wanted. I wanted to be seen as a peer and as a professional. And so I kept my loud, brash comments to myself, and I tried not to talk about middle school, and I generally tried to be helpful and polite, and I found myself doing this seen and not heard kind of thing that I'd read about in books. Rehearsals progressed and things started going better. The woman who swore a blue streak on one of those first days quickly became sort of like a fun aunt, you know, always drunk but always there with a smile. And she actually remains one of my friends to this day. I remember as the shows started, there was this big purple armchair backstage that I thought was super comfy. In retrospect, there are a lot of stains on that I really shudder to think about. But I remember holding up on that chair with like my book or my homework, and there was another actor who also wasn't on stage a lot of the show. He had a smaller part like me. He would sit there knitting while, you know, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll happened on the other side of the wall. We would chat and yuck it up and talk about this, that, and the other. And I liked to crochet, and he liked to knit. We talked about yarn, and, you know, they were discussing genitalia and drugs outside. A usual Saturday evening for any 8th grader. And even people who had told me to my face they didn't like working with kids, I soon became a more or less instrumental part. I remember one person who was very, very wary of me. I helped her in her quick change every night. There was one part of the show where she had to be covered in, it looked like plastic surgery, like get up, like all the black lines, and I would be there frantically scrubbing her back and shoulders with a makeup wipe to get her ready to go out on stage for the next number. And she obviously didn't hate me enough to let me do that. So that was pretty excellent. And I learned a lot of the skills that I gathered there, such as how to answer up to a stage manager and how to interact with an adult as a peer instead of just as a scary adult, were skills that served me well for the rest of my life. I was always great at being, you know, the cute kid, and my part was exactly that, 5 minutes of me being on stage and adorable, which I excelled at immensely. With my little, you know, my little blonde wig to make me look blonde and German, which I'm not. And with my next show at my school, we did like Les Mis or something like that, and I was easily the most professional of all the 13-year-olds. And then they asked me to be in another show with the same theater company, Boxcar Theater, and it's a show that I'm actually still working on. I have work there tomorrow with a lot of the same faces, same director, some of the same actors. It's been overall a great experience, and I really learned a lot from being, you know, a child in the adult world. The one negative, the one thing that I wish had been done differently, the one regret that I have from that is the director never paid me my jelly beans. Nick, I'm waiting. Thank you.